How's it going, everybody? So first things first, I got a new microphone, so let me know what you think about this audio. Does it sound okay? Do you think I need to change it? Let me know in the comments what you think. I'm always trying to increase the quality of these videos. So as promised, it's been about 2 years since I built my hand tool workbench, and it's time for me to show you the end of this project. If you want to see the first half of the project, it'll be the top link in my description. If you're ever going to be doing a solid tabletop, it's important to remember that there is little to no chance that it will stay flat over the next few seasons. You will need to wait a minimum of at least 2 wet seasons and 2 dry seasons for the wood to stabilize, and then after those 2 years, you have to reflatten the top. This is just the simple cost of working with solid untreated wood. But I will tell you, this will give you the absolute best result. Since I built this bench, I added a tail vise and a bench dog system to the workbench, and I'm not a big fan of how these dogs turned out, so I'll be switching from a dowel system to a square peg system. The biggest issue I've had with this dowel style bench dog system is that they are a lot more difficult to resize than square ones would be. They worked perfectly after I installed them, but every time I try to rejuvenate the bench top with the linseed oil, the wood expands exactly the way it's supposed to, but of course that also means the holes will obviously shrink. The problem is that now whenever I want to move the bench dogs around, I have to use a mallet. So on top of flattening the bench, I also want to change the bench dog system. A while back, I even went through and re-drilled all of the holes, but the dowels also expanded from the linseed oil, which means I have to constantly sand them as well. This part got really tedious. It really wouldn't be that big of a deal, except for the hardwood dowels don't sand very quickly, and have you ever tried to re-drill a Forstner hole? It's not exactly as easy as it sounds, and it usually ends up chattering the surface you're drilling pretty badly. You'd have better luck having a woodpecker drill the holes. When I first built the bench, I intentionally left it a little bit longer than I needed it to be so that I could plane it down after it was done warping. However, this wood was fairly stable when I built the bench, so I didn't really have to remove as much of the material as I thought I was going to flatten the bench. It was still surprisingly flat. So the first thing I decided to do was to flip the bench over and cut the legs down to 38 inches. This is about the same height as all of my other benches. Another one of the upgrades I did to my bench was this tail vise. It works pretty well, but I've never installed one before. So one of the biggest issues I had after I installed the tailstock was that the bracket for the vise was actually in the way of a few of the bench dogs, so I decided to move the bracket forward, which also gives me a bit more capacity for the vise. This part just gets screwed into place. When that was all done, I could just flip the bench over and make sure it still rides nice and flat. Now that the legs are shortened, you can see how I only have a little bit more material to remove at this point so that all of the benches are the same height. I used a 60 grit sanding belt on my belt sander, working in different directions to flatten the top, occasionally checking to make sure it stayed flat and square. I just did this with a framer's square. Once everything was sanded flat, I could switch over to my 120 grit on the orbital and then finish off the whole thing with a 220. I had these 3 sections of a quartered log left over from a previous project where I made a live edge shelf. That link will also be in the description if you're interested. Since I have 3 of these quarters left over, and since this is the only hardwood I had for the right size in the shop, I decided to use this to make the bench dogs. And in last week's video, I sharpened these table saw blades, and I am so happy I did that because this usually takes a lot longer to run all of this hardwood through the table saw. I wanted all the bench dogs to be tangential and parallel to the side of the bench, so I clamped a piece of plywood to the bench to line everything up. After I was done marking everything out, I could start chopping the whole square. This took the longest. Looking back, I probably would have just made a jig with my router and filed the whole square once I was done. This part really did take a lot longer than I wanted it to. It's times like these I'm reminded of the advice my grandpa told me when I was about 3 years old. Unfortunately, I wasn't really listening because I was only 3 years old. So, what the heck am I supposed to do now? Okay, so I got all of my square holes chiseled, finally. It's all done. I did end up figuring out there was one screw down there that I didn't know was there, coming in from the housing that holds the vise together. I thought I placed that screw better, but apparently not. And I ended up dinging the heck out of my nice chisel. That's my nice one. I was using my crappy ones around it afterwards, but this is my nice one. It's gonna be fun to try and sharpen that out. I did get some of the ding out. But anyway, I'm going to go to bed because it's hot, it's late, and I got work tomorrow. So I will see you all in a few days when I finish this project. Since I milled these bench dogs out of a very raw state, they all expanded a tiny bit overnight. This was to be expected. This log has been sitting around for about 2 years before I quartered it a few months ago, and so I'm expecting these to expand and contract just a little bit over time. This is exactly why I wanted to make these dogs square rather than round, because the square ones are going to be a lot easier to resize over time. And if I need to, I can even custom fit each one. There's really no big trick to these. The first thing you want to make sure to keep in mind is that the top of the dog that does the holding has to be cut at an angle. I usually aim somewhere between about 5 and 10 degrees, but that really just depends on how loose they fit inside your bench. There's a lot of different ways you can make these wooden springs, but all I did was I cut a small slot in the front of each of the bench dogs about 1/8 inch from the edge using a scroll saw. To use this as a wooden spring, you have to find something that will push the spring forward, and I found these 18 gauge brad nails work perfectly. I just hammered them into place 3 at a time from each side. The spring is what holds the bench dog in place until you apply pressure with the workpiece. These bench dogs worked out so well, I highly recommend them to anybody who's thinking about installing these on their own bench. They're so much better than bench cats. So ornery. Get a job, cat. Yeah. Now it's finally time to put the oil back on the surface of the bench. I usually use linseed oil, but this time I decided to try this butcher block oil. This will function the same as the linseed oil, but it's made specifically for cutting boards and countertops. If I can find a link to this stuff, I'll put a link to it in my description. With linseed oil, there's always the issue of spilling products on top of the bench after you put the linseed oil on it, and the bench top gets degraded over time. But with this butcher block oil, it's supposed to be a lot less chance of that. Hey Ellie, do you want to come help me? Come here. Can you move your fingers? Move your fingers. There you go. Butcher block oil. Okay. So then you take this and you go whoosh. Can you go like that? Go for it. Good job, Ellie. Can I have a high five? High five. Good job. Go ahead. Oh, good job. High five. Yeah. Good job. Let's try one more time. Go ahead. There you go. Good job, Ellie. Look at Ellie. She's so good at the bench. Are you gonna learn woodworking? Are you gonna learn woodworking? Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Oh. Don't chew on that. It's pallet wood. That's pallet wood. No. That's pallet wood. No. Stop it. Here, hold on. Here you go. Yeah? There you go. We'll put the blade over there for you, okay? Wanna try it? Yeah. Say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.